Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of the podcast. Today I am joined by a wonderful jeweler called Elsa Tierney, and she is a Goldsmith award-winning jeweler. She works a lot in wax. She's also a sculptor and artist, so she has a really interesting kind of background, and we're going to talk a bit about her journey into jewelry making. But one of the reasons why I've asked her to come on today is she has made an incredible book called Art of Wax. So we're going to be talking a bit about the book and how you can get your hands on a copy. And she makes handmade jewelry. She's based here in the UK. I've actually done some classes with her, and she's a wonderful teacher as well. So if you're interested in wax carving or just want to know a bit more about wax, or just a jeweler who's just curious about different parts of the industry, I think you're going to really love today's episode. So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Jessica. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. I've been wanting to get you on the podcast for a while. And when I saw your book came out, I was like, this is a perfect opportunity to talk about it because I always find there aren't enough books on wax. I know there's been a few more over the years, but when we first started teaching wax at London Jewellery Schools like 12 years ago, it was almost impossible to find a wax book. So
yeah, and also a wax book that's a bit that has something a bit more broad, because wax comes in so many forms, and I've learned that myself through, I suppose, through having a background in jewelry and art. I've recognized wax is used in different places, so in different ways. And I think I was looking for a book that didn't exist, and so that's how this one kind of came about a little bit.
yeah, and I think that's always the best projects, aren't they? When we want something that
Yeah.
doesn't exist, they were like, let's create it. And actually, you've made it really quickly because I remember we were chatting about it.
Well,
It probably didn't
3
feel
years.
that quick.
No, Instagram, the magic of Instagram. It's taken a good 3 years to make the book, but obviously many years of research and lots of courses that I've taken. So it's a lot of work that has kind of come to fruition, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think all books are a labor of love of some sort. So
Definitely, yeah.
I'm excited to see a copy.
Mhm.
So before we get into talking more about the book and wax and everything,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear a bit more about your journey. How did you come to be a jeweler? You're a really successful jeweler. You've got your own studio. You award-winning, and please go and check out Elsa's work. It is gorgeous. She's got these amazing kind of face rings and all these different collections, and yeah, you'll absolutely love it. But where did that all start? Did you always know you wanted to be a jeweler, or did you kind of come to it gradually?
Well, I want to be like, I actually probably been making jewelry since I was about maybe 6, 7, or 8 years old. Like my mum would buy me findings from, hobby craft stores. So I was always like making things. And I think we went on holiday where I had my hair braided, and I watched how it was done. And then I started making them when I got home. And I remember they get really tied in your hair. So I actually then made one that you could just slide in. And I started making, my mum used to get colorful electrical wire, and I started using that instead of thread and making bangles and, other jewelry. And I was selling it on, car boot sales at my school. So I kind of feel like I've always had jewelry. I've always loved jewelry. My auntie had an amazing jewelry collection, very Art Deco style. And I used to call it treasure. And I'd be like, oh, can I go into your treasure box? And she would say yes. And I would try all the jewelry on. And she had very sort of modernist style, very brutalist or Art Deco, and a combination of gold and silver. And so I've always been questioning how that was made. And then when I was in my teens, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do when I left high school. And my mum suggested that I do a fashion. I was always looking at magazines, Vogue and stuff. And yeah, she said, do a fashion design course, a summer course. And that then led to doing textiles for 4 years. So I did an ND and then HND in textiles. But then I started making jewelry from textiles. And so I was selling that on markets in Spitalfield, and it was going really well. But I never really thought of it as a job. I kind of always, it was just something I did. But I wanted to learn how to finish things properly. So I did a course at Sir John Cass and in silversmithing and jewelry making. And yeah, I did that for 2 years. And then I got to know a lot of art students, and just graduated in fine art. So back then it was a bit different. You could study a lot more than you can now. I think obviously people are restricted, but you could get grants quite easily. So I was very lucky in that I had that broad kind of background. And also my mum's a painter, so I have always been interested in art. She's from Austria as well. So again, a very sort of European style of art. And yeah, I've always had books around, and she used to take me a lot to museums and galleries. So I've always taken inspiration from that as well. So yeah, that's my background.
Yeah, yeah.
Quite
Well, I
broad.
love hearing about your story because I think, a lot of people come to jewelry later in life having
Yeah.
always done the opposite, whether it's like accounting or being a
Mm.
lawyer or like some sort of stressful job. And then sort of being like, this is what I've really always wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I love that you didn't know exactly, but you kind of knew. It sounded like everything you did, you ended up making jewelry out of it, whether it was
Yeah.
electrical
It's
wire,
true.
fabric, or
Mm.
it kept calling you in a way.
Yeah.
And it sounds like your family were quite supportive of an artistic route, which is really
Yeah.
lovely. And I hope
Yeah.
that more and more that will become norm,
Yeah.
that people are encouraged. And it's amazing that so you studied textiles, then you studied fine
Mm.
art. And then when did you come to actually starting a jewelry business and actually being like, this is something that I'm going to do as my career?
Yeah. So in my 30s, I mean, I graduated at 25. And again, for a whole period of time, because I graduated in art, we weren't really prepared for the real world. And I tried to be an artist. I tried to get exhibitions. I was often organizing exhibitions, and being active in that sense. But I wasn't making money from that. But I was making jewelry still in my bedroom, because at the time I was living with 5 other people. We didn't have a living room, but I had a very big bedroom. So obviously made it and had a space where I could make jewelry. But I was working in perspex, and mixed media. I'd actually forgotten by then how to solder. I felt a little bit or not confident doing soldering, but I really wanted to. And so I have epilepsy, and my epilepsy was quite bad at that time. Um, so I was selling jewelry, but it would bring me back down every time I tried to get up. It would bring me back down. So it took me a little while to figure out how to. I was very lucky in that we found a medication that worked, and slowly but surely, um, I just started. I remember somebody, I think it was Vanessa, who was the organizer at Cockpit, and my mum was saying, "You need a studio. I know this lady. I know the lady from Cockpit. She kindly showed us round, and um, at one point that she said, if you take a studio here, you have to be in 3 days a week as part of the rules." And I was like, but how can you do that? I mean, you can't make money otherwise, you know, what would you do for work? And she said, no, if you want to be a jeweler, you have to just be in 3 days a week at least.
Mm.
And I was like, okay. And then I couldn't afford a studio at Cockpit at the time, but I found a place on Benchpeg. And yeah, it kind of went from there. It's still my studio now. When the lady who was managing the space left, I took over just because I didn't want to lose my space. And then I created other bench spaces that I rent out to other jewelers, and I try to keep it affordable so that it's basically a space where, as a jeweler, I think as well, we're quite solitary beings, I think.
Yeah.
So I do really appreciate having other jewelers around me. They're, you know, everyone has sort of sporadic times and don't often see each other that often, but when we do, it's kind of like, oh, there's someone in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's quite nice. Yeah.
And I've seen your studio. It's beautiful. You know, it's got lots of
Oh, thank
natural
you. When
light
it's
and
tidy. I
oh,
think I might have tidied up when you came
you
round.
tidied up for me. Thank you. But yeah, I think it's such a genius idea that you rented this space that was bigger than you needed, which
Yeah,
most of us only need like a couple of meters really
yeah,
to actually make in. And then yeah, for an affordable amount, rent it out to other jewelers so that you can all kind of
yeah.
have a little bit of community there together. So
And I think as well, so getting that space made the transition, and obviously taking medication for my epilepsy, that was the transition, because for me, I had people around me at the time who, you know, reminded me in a way how to solder, and I kept picking up bits. So having people around me actually really helped me get back on in that track. And then, you know, opportunities to do fairs. Craft Central at the time was a really good place to exhibit, so I was often doing lots of fairs. Again, it was always like it wasn't a side project, but it was kind of like I was working in another job plus doing the jewelry. But there was a certain point where I suddenly thought, oh, you know, this could be a job. I can't quite figure out, maybe through the
gradually
conversation,
dawned
maybe
on
it'll come up. But at some point, things started to become, you know, clear to me that this could be a viable business.
yeah. Well, thank goodness, because it's an awesome business now.
Yeah, it's okay. I mean, Instagram always gives you like the glossy
Of
version.
course, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah,
I'm sure it's not always straightforward and lots of work, you know, like
yeah,
all these businesses, but you know, doing amazing things, and a lot of people would look up to a business like
yeah.
this, sure. So tell us a bit about wax. What's your journey with wax? How did it come into the picture? When did you start?
Yeah.
Was it like an immediate love at first sight, or was
Well,
it
no, definitely not. I tried it a little bit. In fact, I was doing fairs where a lot of people were making jewelry with wax. And at the time, I was making things with sheet metal and wire. And I admit that I had sort of slight resentment towards anyone who was getting something just cast, you know, and it was like, oh, but, you know, they just do that and it's easy. Um, and then I I tried wax carving and I didn't like it very much. And then I had a commission to make a piece in that was sculptural and needed to be done in wax. And I thought, with some tips from some friends, I thought I'll give it another go. And I did an okay job. And I realized that the reason it didn't work first time was because I was using the wrong tools. And you know, they were these dental tools that were very blunt, not sharp ones. And that I realized they're good for soft wax, because dental tools originally were designed for making gold teeth. So you would have sheet wax and you'd be modeling that around a mold of teeth. So yeah, I mean, there are sharpened ones and you can use those for wax, but you just, when you go to any jewelry shop, you know, you just get given a load of tools because they're wax carving tools or wax tools, and they're actually not all good for one type of wax. There are lots of different types of wax and lots of different types of tools for them. But yeah, that was where I sort of, that first commission was where I discovered wax. And then I went on to sort of, I had lots of drawings and nothing was good enough. It was all just simple line drawings, and I kept thinking these are all really basic and crap, and you know, but I kept asking myself, what could I do? What could I do? And then I just thought, I've just got to start somewhere. And that's when I did the first one, was the deco face ring. And it just kind of, with some tips from a few friends, you know, on trying to get on getting that high polish finish and things like that, I kind of just felt like I naturally sort of, I had a natural connection with it. I think it achieved the kind of results that I loved in art, so like sculpture, and this, you know, basic 2D line drawing actually was turned into something quite beautiful in wax, something three-dimensional, a lot more complex. And my designs tend to evolve during the carving process. The line drawing is just the beginning idea sketch.
Yeah, I love that. The idea that you start with some drawings, and I think it's quite sweet that you thought, oh, this is just simple and basic and rubbish. But actually, that's what's beautiful about your work, is the simple lines that come across, and how it, how that is really impactful. And I know you, maybe it's on your website, or I've heard you speak about the faces and why you're drawn to faces as well, in terms of that connection with
yeah, I think it's sort of, the face appears a lot in Art Deco styles in art as well. So Man Ray often did photos of his wife Kiki sort of resting her head on the table, and you kind of, and she's holding an African mask, and obviously there is that connection with the Art Deco period was hugely influenced by African arts that were coming in to Paris at the time. And, they'd never seen anything like it. And it was fresh, it was exciting. And, it wasn't trying to sort of recreate things realistically. It was saying, no, we can tear all that apart and actually just, a face doesn't have to be a realistic representation. It can be an abstract one as well. It can be a simplified one, and have some kind of connection with the maker, rather than it just being an exact copy of something.
Absolutely. Sometimes less is more, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So then how did the book come about? Because obviously you've been running your business for a while, you had your own studio, making and selling, doing all the things. Was it through your teaching? Can you tell us a bit about your teaching as well? But yeah, tell us how the journey of the book began.
So I do teach, and I teach sort of, I've taught in classes, and also I do one-to-one, which I kind of prefer, because I like that one-to-one connection, where when I'm teaching someone something, I want to teach them what they need to learn and what they want to learn to create the things they want to create, rather than saying, okay, here's a bit of wax, we're going to make a ring that, is kind of either organic, or if you want skills, then, it's wrong for me to impose certain skills onto the student, and then they walk away with that, and it's like, I think the skills, for me anyway, a one-to-one, I was able to do that. So if someone is serious about wanting to become a jeweler, then, I can maybe help them jump over the obstacles that sometimes, exist, like the tools, the right tools and things like that, because they're things that I struggled with. And when it comes to teaching, I suppose because my mum's has been a teacher for a long period of time, and she still teaches, I've kind of always had that in me. And so when a friend of mine kind of said, "Oh, you should make a book," he's actually the graphic designer of the book. Yeah.
He had a vested interest.
Well, kind of, but I think he wanted to just create an art book with just photos of my jewelry. And I was like, no, that's just weird. A book about my jewelry. That's just like, why would I do that? I don't want to seem grandiose or anything like that. So, but I kind of thought maybe an art book, but also a technical book. So, taking inspiration from art. Also, a book that you can look through and it's just visually stimulating as well as informative. I also wanted to sort of explain where, the origin of wax or wax carving, wax sculpting, and the differences between, sculpting and building, and then removing and carving, and just references to it in history, and how that, by doing that might inspire others to try different things, especially sort of that duality between sculpture and jewelry, because they are sculptural, they are both using sculptural techniques. So there's an alchemy section in the book that is all about experimentation. And there were always lots of things that I kept seeing, and I kept thinking, oh, I wonder how that's made. And I'd try it and it wasn't working. But then I'd do a course somewhere in something else and go, oh, this wax might work for that. And then figuring it out that way. And a lot of these techniques were things I wanted to learn, like the mid-throw hikime technique, which was a Japanese wax technique. It's online, but there's no, like, there are examples online, but no one shares anything. And when they do, it's not really, it's not, I don't think anyone knows enough for it so it's hard to find things on it, and no one shares that information. So because obviously, people have businesses based on it, and all their style is based on that, and it's difficult then to sort of go out and share all these things. But I wanted to learn
kind of what's not new, but it seems to be having a moment at the moment. This is kind of like I don't know how to describe it, but it looks almost like a string cheesy type, but much nicer looking organic way of working with the wax, which is not the carving, is it? It's kind of
it's sculpting, and so you are stretching and folding, but also it's a technique that if you're working with it, you kind of, I think a lot of people expect immediate results, because sometimes it does show these lines, but I think the more you work with the wax and screw it back up, and the more you keep working with it, the wax matures, and then also you so you get better lines, but also you're kind of getting to know the material that you're holding onto, and you can sort of, you get better at understanding it, so you can be more spontaneous and confident, and the more you play with it, so you'll get, I think as well, because it's available to purchase, it's precious and you don't want to waste it, so you generally just cast everything straight away. But I think the more you work with it, the better the wax becomes. So I think that's something that I've kind of come to realize from my own experience, that the first pieces aren't the best ones actually, and you can't be too precious, because if you can see that it's not quite right, then don't be scared to like squeeze it up and start again.
You're not going to look at it the next day and think, actually, it's better.
No, exactly. And you know, sometimes we get them cast because we feel like, you know, I'll buy some more and but you don't have to. You can just keep squeezing it up, and then slowly you will get better results. Yeah.
Cool. And so there's lots of different types of wax that you talk about in the
Yeah.
book. Could you just give us a little bit of an overview, not of all of them, obviously, but just for somebody new to wax who doesn't know any of the different types, what are some of the things that they might explore in the book?
So the hard wax carving, I have a section on hard wax carving, and the book is a little bit about, you know, hard waxes and the difference between hard waxes and soft waxes and the things that they're both good for. And my experience of soft wax as well was, you know, I was getting good at carving, or I was known for the carving, but I like the results of soft wax sometimes, where you see things in museums and they have this kind of organic texture, or, you know, but I wanted to be able to do that, but do it well and understand it, especially the kind that's in sculptures. So I'd see things by Henry Moore, and I'd love the file marks. How did he create those? Because the wax is soft and so on. And then I realized, you know, that he was using plaster and things like that. So the idea of the book is that it's about the material of wax and also techniques to do with carving and sculpting, and how those can be applied, you know, different materials, those skills for different materials can be applied to wax as well. And so, yeah, it's got a chapter on carving by myself, a chapter by my friend who uses soft wax to make maquettes, like 3D preparations for carving in wood. And then Robert, so that's Sarah Davis, and then Robert Worley, he makes sheet wax and sculpts with sheet wax, and so they're using all different soft waxes for different ways of working with it. And then we have the mid-throw hikime technique, and the alchemy section, which has lots of different really fun experimental ways of working with wax that usually are practiced in, or sometimes practiced in, either sculpture or art, sculpture or jewellery, and then how they could be applied cross-disciplinary. So, you know, how you could take sculptural aspects and make them into jewellery, and sort of vice versa. And then recycling, and some more technical aspect in wax carving, and a chapter about how wax has been used in art and artifacts over time. Wonderful. So yeah, that's it.
Well, it sounds fascinating. I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. And I know that you did a really kind of interesting way of launching the book as well. You did a Kickstarter campaign, which I think makes a lot of sense, because printing books is very expensive, especially art books, you know, with all the beautiful colors and photography and all of that. So that has now finished, hasn't it, the Kickstarter? And you achieved, you surpassed your goal, which is amazing, because many Kickstarters don't achieve the goal. And you guys did such an awesome job. But if somebody wants to get a copy of the book now, they can come straight to your website, can't they? And you've got a link there.
So I have a link. So now that the Kickstarter has ended, I've created a new sort of shop platform where you can continue to buy the book. It's a pre-order system. So the book is going to print and will be printed and ready in January. And so you're pre-ordering the book and you receive it in January. And all the funds go towards, obviously, the printing of the book, which we have covered, but there's so many more costs entailed, like promotion, and so post production costs will, everything will go towards that, and potentially printing more books as well. So
wonderful.
We're doing 2,000 copies, which sounds like a lot, but we sold 500 in the campaign. So and that was within a month. So you know, who knows what will happen. And there are people who are still really interested in getting a copy. So yeah.
Oh, definitely. I'm sure you'll sell those 2,000 and then need to order 2,000 more. And
Yeah. In the new year, we'll do a second run. Yeah.
But it's a great Christmas present for yourself, you know?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. A slightly delayed one because it will be January. But, you know, if it's for
You
yourself,
need nice things in January, don't you?
yeah, exactly. I always think the same. Exactly. We need January presents as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will definitely be getting a copy, and I encourage anyone who's interested. It's a beautiful book and it's supporting, you know, the industry. And I think that it will just be very inspiring as well. Like I
Yeah.
always find those kind of books very inspiring. I remember when we had the London Jewellery School, one of my jobs in setting it up was buying a library of jewelry books, which is a great job because I was like, I just get to buy all the books on Amazon and, you know, flicking through them and watching students flick through them. And even sometimes things that they're never going to make, but you never know, it might spark something else. That's just
what the book's about as well, very much about that. It's not that, it's about finding out what works for you. And so I give you a choice of things, and then, you know, you can either practice them or, you know, you might take inspiration from it. You might go and see a piece of artwork in a museum and look at things differently and see how they were made, or question these things as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And so for anyone starting out in wax in general, what advice would you give, just from your experience as a jeweler, as a teacher, if someone's saying, oh, I'd like to give this a go, but I just, you know, just starting out, what would your one kind of key bit advice?
Well, wax carving for me was the kind of catalyst for my business being more viable, I guess. Not that it's just a lot harder. It was very hard for me to continue making the same pieces again and again and not feel a little bit like, you know, just sort of everybody was working in wax, and then I was making each individual piece, and, you know, each piece is handmade, but it's handmade in carving and casting. It's just a different process, and some things are good for that, and some things, you know, some things are good for making in sheet and wire wax, and then some things are good for carving in sheet and wire metal.
So
it's for the two. But wax gave me the ability to make the pieces I wanted to make. It also gave me the ability to make sculptures, which so my art practice it's actually given me a medium that I can work with. So with the wax, because it can be done in your bedroom, I wouldn't recommend it, but in a small space at home, you don't need a huge amount of tools, which is great. I would say don't go in a shop and buy all the tools. I would decide what you want to make, decide whether it's a carving or a sculpting process, whether it looks like it was carved, or, you know, whether your inspiration comes from that or comes from something that is more built up maybe. And then so don't necessarily buy all the tools, buy them bit by bit, and also, like you say, you know, just like that worry about, oh, I'm not quite ready for it yet, or can I do this? Wax really helps in that sense. You, like I said, you can do it with minimal amount of tools, small space. You can work outside in the garden or whatever, and you like with my own designs, you know, I thought they weren't good enough. If you have ideas, write them down in a little list, maybe like an ideas for collection list. And when you say to yourself, you know, when you have that time, when you can make that time to make something, and then you're going, oh, but I don't have any ideas. Whereas before you've got loads of ideas all the time, and then suddenly you've got some time. I would say just do one of them. It doesn't matter. Just start one of them and just go with it, and not worry about whether it's good or bad. It doesn't have to be great. it can just be, you know, the end result isn't always a finished piece. It can also be the skills that you learn through doing it. So, you know, you're gaining something either way. Even if it's goes completely wrong, you can start that same piece again, knowing what you do now. So I would just say just start, and don't worry about it, and don't worry about it being a business either. It can just be something you're practicing and doesn't have to be immediate.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. I love your approach to it as well. It's, you know, just very comforting,
Mm,
calming. And I think that's probably where the magic comes from, is
mm,
kind of energy of let's see, let's play
mm.
with this, let's
Yeah.
explore. And your kind of open-mindedness. I think it's, you know, in
And
terms of the process, I think that's really
yeah,
refreshing and helpful.
some things, someone asked me once what tool I would recommend. And obviously there are lots of jewelry tools that I would recommend. You know, I love tools, but if you are at the place of, you know, selling at fairs and stuff like that, getting a card reader was a really, really good move.
Yeah.
And it actually meant that, you know, I wasn't saying, oh, there's a cash point round the corner and then losing sales. Yeah, just get a card reader. They're not that expensive, and
No.
they really are, you know, quite
Potential
fun.
profitability.
Yeah, exactly. And they do help. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Elsa, thank you so much for coming and sharing. I feel like we could talk
Pleasure.
about this for hours, but definitely go and get a copy of the book.
Thank
Also,
you.
people can come and find you on Instagram, can't they, and check out your wonderful jewelry.
Yeah.
And yeah, we'll put a link to all of that in the show notes. And just thanks again for sharing and being here.
Oh, thank you so much for, you know, inviting me. I really, really appreciate it.